Hey everybody, welcome back to Better Workdays. I'm your host Andy Morrison from Real Custom Training, and this week I want to talk about something that comes up a lot in my Supervisory Essentials training program, and that's the question of how do you talk to an employee when they screw up? How do you talk to somebody when they've made a mistake? So let's talk about it this week, and let's look at it this way, all right? Let's talk about the mistakes we make when we discuss mistakes, because as I mentioned in a recent episode, I love the book Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most. And one of the things I love in that book is that they lay out for us, they don't just tell you how to have the difficult conversation. First, they tell us how we tend to approach these conversations. And I know when I read it, I said, oh yeah, that is how I might approach that conversation. So they talk about how we tend to approach these things kind of in an erroneous way, but it feels like the natural way. It feels like how we should address these things. But let me show you, here's a slide directly from my workshop on difficult conversations. Isn't that exciting? A real world slide. Wow. If you're listening, instead of watching on the stream, allow me to read this to you. This is right from the book. They say, regardless of context, the things that make difficult conversations difficult and the errors in thinking and acting that compound those difficulties are the same. We all share the same fears and fall into the same traps. Now, these folks are from the Harvard Negotiation Project. So they came to this conclusion after working with hundreds and hundreds of people who had to have, many difficult conversations on every sort of topic you could think of. And that's the conclusion they came to, is that the specificity of each difficult conversation could be endlessly unique. There's all sorts of things you can have difficult conversations about. But when you really look at all of them, there are patterns in what makes them difficult and the mistakes that we make that compound those difficulties. So I want to talk about some of those mistakes when it comes specifically to when you have to talk to an employee about an error that they made, a screw up that they had. So let's look at some of those mistakes. The framework that they give you in the book is this. They say to consider that no matter what difficult conversation you're having, and how do you define difficult conversation? It's pretty easy. It's any conversation you find hard to talk about. That's a difficult conversation. Any difficult conversation typically ends up sort of being comprised of three different conversations wrapped into one big conversation. And those three conversations are addressing these questions. The first question is, what happened here? The second question, how do we feel about what happened? And the third question, how does what happened reflect on us as people? And within each of these realms, there's all sorts of different ways that we trip ourselves up. I want to focus on the first question in this episode, the what happened conversation. Because when you're talking to an employee about a mistake that was made, yeah, you're largely going to be talking about what happened. So I'm going to focus on that in this episode. And then I'm going to do follow-up episodes where we're going to talk about the how do we feel about what happened question. And then we'll do an episode on the how does what happened reflect on us as people question. And by the end of those three episodes, you're going to have a really good overview of how to change your thinking when you're approaching a difficult conversation. So for today, we're going to talk about how to change your thinking when it comes to dissecting what happened in a difficult conversation, especially when you're talking to an employee about an error that they made. Now, I want to give you a scenario that I'm going to use as the thread to weave through this episode, as pretentious as that sounds. Here's a scenario. Grace is a manager of a team of workshop facilitators. Okay, folks like me. Frank is a member of her team, and let's say she's got 10 facilitators on her team, all right? So Grace is the manager, Frank is the employee. And what has happened is once a month, Grace gets her whole team of 10 together, and they're all busy people, traveling all over the place. It's hard to get them together. This time together is sacred. They really need to make the most of it. Frank, however, about a dozen times or so now, over the past year, he's very often rolling in late for the meeting. Never hugely late, never 45 minutes late, usually within, anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes late, but it's getting pretty consistent. Otherwise, Frank's an awesome employee, and that's partly why Grace has not addressed the mistake, the error with him. And that's a trap that a lot of us fall into. When someone's an awesome employee and you see them making what seems like a little mistake, it's natural to think, I shouldn't bring it up. Like, why be a wet blanket? They're great overall. I'm not gonna worry about, little things. But all of a sudden, that little thing you've been ignoring is starting to really piss you off, because in Grace's case, she's noticing when Frank's 10 minutes late, sometimes it disrupts the flow of the meeting. Sometimes he misses out on key bits of information and has to get caught up. Sometimes people have questions that only Frank could answer, and he's not there to do it. And what's bugging her even more is maybe she'd be a little less mad if Frank kind of skulked in like a dog with its tail between its leg, full of an appropriate level of shame for being late, right? But not as far as from her perspective. It's like Frank just rolls in without a care in the world that he's running a little late, and it's really starting to bother her. And this is the trap we fall into when we lead these conversations with anger, okay? I call it going into reprimand mode. In managing difficult conversations, they call it delivering a message mode. So that's when you approach the conversation kind of from the perspective of, I'm going to set Frank straight. All right, you're in reprimand mode. You're kind of leading with anger. That's how you're approaching the conversation. Now, in all my workshops, when somebody says, hey, I'm facing this scenario, what should I do? The first thing I ask them is, what result do you want to get out of it? And that's the same approach you need to take to a difficult conversation. And the experts who wrote this book would agree. You need to create your billboard statement of what you want to get out of this conversation. What's the result you're seeking? A quick aside, that's real leadership stuff. Real leaders have a result orientation. They are always thinking about the result they're going for, and then they try to exert influence to get that result. So always start with that. What's your result you're looking for? So in Grace's case, what result is she looking for? Well, remember, she's pretty mad. She's in reprimand mode. She wants to deliver a message. So she would probably say, yeah, I know what result I want. It's that Frank can never be late again. Frank's got to be showing up for these things on time. And she's going to approach the conversation accordingly. Now, what happens when she does that is she's going to go into the conversation with Frank, and she's going to say, hey, Frank, what happened here? That's going to be your first question. What happened? And that's natural. That's what we do in these conversations. The first thing we do is we get down to what happened here. Now, a framework I give people when they need to talk to employees about behavioral stuff is the SBOE, okay? I don't have a snappier acronym. Not like real custom training, relevant, engaging, actionable, and lasting. SBOE, situation, behavior, outcome, expectation. Handy little framework for this stuff. So I'm going to show you how you can use the situation, behavior, outcome, expectation framework, but even go about that the wrong way. So if Grace is going into this in reprimand mode, when she gets to what happened, that's the situation. And she might say, Frank, as you know, our team can only get together once a month. This is an essential meeting. It's important to everybody, and we all have really limited time. That's the situation here. The behavior, Frank, you have been rolling in 5 to 10 minutes late, and I've been keeping track, and it's almost every month that you're running in late when you should be here on time. So situation and behavior cover the what happened. It also covers the what should have happened. That's what Grace is saying when she says, Frank, you should have been here on time. What should have happened? You should be here on time, if not a little bit early, Frank. Okay? And then the other trap we fall into is we tend to get into a discussion of who's right and who's wrong. Grace is presenting this as if she's right and Frank is wrong. She might say, when you're late, Frank, here's the outcome in our framework. When you're late, it disrupts the flow of the meeting. You're missing out on important conversations. Sometimes you're not here when people need information from you. All right. Who's at fault? Everyone else here gets here on time, yet you can't be bothered, Frank. It's your responsibility to be on time. Next time, your butt's in that seat at 9 a.m., and your butt's in that seat at 9 a.m. every month thereafter. Do we understand each other? And when she says that, what she's really talking to Frank about is what will happen next time. So that's one way you could use the situation, behavior, outcome, and expectation framework. But let's talk about where Grace went wrong there. She may feel like she knocked it out of the park because Frank might say, yes, I understand. We'll see what happens the next month. if you look at the Managing Difficult Conversations book, and what they suggest is there's a few key areas in which we go astray when we approach these conversations that way in reprimand mode. The first is truth. We all think we know the truth. And not to sound like we just took a bunch of gummies together, but there is no truth, man. There's no truth. It's perception of truth. And we all fall into that trap of thinking our perception of truth is the truth. So for Grace, I don't need Frank's side of the story because I have observed the story. I know the story. The story is this guy's rolling in late every month without a care in the world, and it's pissing everybody off. That's what she thinks the story is. So that's the trap we fall into, is thinking our story is the only story. And especially when we go into big bad boss mode like that, it's, I don't want to hear from you. You're going to hear from me, and I'm going to set an expectation for you, and you damn well better meet it. And we kind of get brazen like that because we think the truth is on our side. When in reality, we've got our truth, Frank has his truth, and then there's a third truth, which is kind of what a neutral observer would say of the situation. So you need to remember that when you go into these conversations, that your truth is not the truth. It's just your perception. And then we go wrong with intentions. We tend to think that we know another person's intentions. All right. And again, I have not taken any gummies today. It's actually been about a month. Well, that's a topic for a future podcast. Why isn't Andy eating gummies anymore? But when it comes to intentions, here's the rub. Okay. Thinking you know someone's intention is actually empathetic. And it's empathetic because empathy is basically putting yourself in someone else's mind and thinking about, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they intending? What's the intention behind their action? Right? A uniquely human thing. I think I'm correct in saying we're the only species on the planet that does that. And you could even say empathy allowed us to conquer this planet. Again, a topic for another podcast in the future. It's going to be called Lead Like a Caveman. But anyway, so empathy is like our human superpower, right? But here's the rub. We kind of suck at it, okay? We kind of suck at it. We're so often wrong, yet we so often think we are right. So, classic example, a car cuts you off in traffic. I've used this analogy before. You're immediately mad. What a jerk. They don't care about anybody. They don't care about safety. Then you follow them down the road and you see them, pull into the emergency room entrance at Day Kimball. Oh, geez, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was too quick to judge. Maybe there's a good reason they cut me off. Oh, geez, what a jerk I feel like now, right? All the time. We think we know what's going on in someone else's head, and we actually do not know. And why is that? Because just like with the truth, they've got their own perspective on things. They know their intention. They know their thoughts. They know their feelings. You have to have the conversation with them to actually find out if your empathetic inkling is correct or not. But when you approach it like Grace did, where it's a one-way conversation and you don't ask Frank for his side of things, she is robbing herself of that valuable information. All right? So it's unrealistic to think you're going to stop making these empathetic assumptions about other people's intention. You'll never quite stop it. I think what you need to do is remember that we suck at doing it. And, I don't know, we're batting probably like 200 on average with that. And remember, you suck at it. And then allow for the possibility. I know this is a crazy thought. Allow for the possibility that your assumptions about the other person are wrong. Even in a case like this, where I've talked to participants about this, it is hard to give people the benefit of the doubt when they're showing up late for work, because it's such a fundamental principle. And it's no, everybody should be on time, and everybody knows you should be on time, right? But you just never know what is going on in their head and why they might be running late. So you need to have the conversation to find out what their true intentions are. And then Grace in the conversation is quick to put all the blame on Frank. All right. And that's the other area where we go wrong when we have these conversations. We get way too hung up on blame. This is another area where we tend to think we're smarter than we are. We always seem to, hey, magically it just works out, right? That the other side's to blame. It's their fault. they're wrong, we're right, it's not our fault. No, again, it's just like truth. That's way too binary, way too simple. It'd be great if life at work was that clean cut, but it's simply not. One of the things I love in the book is they talk about how you need to always look at what your responsibility is in any situation. So in this case, Grace needs to look at, yeah, Frank's rolling in late. What have I done to contribute to this? And I'll get to that in a minute, that idea of contribution. But just keep in mind, this is a hang up. If you're going into the conversation trying to sell the other person on the idea that they are to blame, you're less likely to get the result that you want to get out of them. So, all right, like I said, they lay it up like this in the book. Here's how we tend to approach it, and here's the why that's wrong, and why you probably won't get the results you want if you approach it that way. So what do you do instead? Let's talk about that. How do you change your thinking and your approach and your strategy to these difficult conversations, especially when you're talking to an employee who made a mistake? Well, the first thing they say is don't be certain, be curious. Let's think about Grace's goal. She's certain that her goal is Frank can never be late again. So that's what gets her into reprimand mode. It's what gets her into, you better do it because I said so mode, because I'm the boss here. That's a very certain way of approaching it. She's certain that that's the goal. She's certain about her approach. She's certain that it's her truth. She's certain that Frank is wrong and she's right. Again, open yourself up to the possibility that you're wrong, or think of it this way. Instead of being certain, try to just be more curious. So let's apply that to her goal. Instead of being certain, Frank needs to never be late again. How can you approach that curiously? Well, curiosity would lead you to ask some questions, the answers to which will actually give you the roadmap to making sure Frank is never late again. Because Frank never being late again is a worthwhile goal. But if you approach with curiosity, you're gonna basically collect data that is actually going to help you achieve that goal. So if you approach it curiously, you're actually gonna, instead of delivering a message to Frank, you're actually gonna ask questions like, why didn't Frank see this coming? Like, what is going on that's leading to Frank being late? I know I feel like he's rolling in without a care in the world, but I don't know if I'm wrong about that. What else might it be? Okay, you got to ask that question. And then how can we keep it from happening again? Good. You get answers to that, and then it's going to increase the likelihood that Frank's never late again, as opposed to just saying, Frank, stop being late. All right, this information is going to be helpful. And it means you're turning it into a conversation. You're going from what they call in the book delivering a message stance to a learning conversation. You put that curiosity hat on, approach the conversation that way. All of a sudden, you're learning information that's actually going to help address the problem and help you reach your goal. So the golden question that you want to ask them, can you help me understand, right? So you can stick to the situation, behavior, outcome, expectation framework, but now you're saying, hey, Frank, I've noticed you're often late for this meeting, and it does hurt the meeting, honestly, Frank. Like, we need you there. So can you help me understand, why is this happening? Boom, put it on Frank. Then all of a sudden he's not going to be as defensive. You're giving him the benefit of the doubt, and you're saying, can you help me understand? You essentially, if we go back to someone cut you off in traffic, Frank has cut you off. And rather than concluding Frank's a careless jerk, you're saying, Frank, help me understand. And maybe Frank's going to say, I'm rushing my pregnant wife to the maternity ward, whatever it's going to be. Help me understand, Frank. If you go back to our episode on assertiveness, when we dissected the scene from The Office where Michael Scott and Stanley have a face-off, I remember pointing out then too, Michael Scott has a breakthrough in that conversation when he finally says to Stanley, help me understand why you treat me the way you treat me. So even when someone's doing a bad thing and making a mistake, you still want to approach it this way. Help me understand why this is happening. Now I said I'd get back to this because I love this. This is going to be a longer episode, but I don't care. Don't talk about blame. Talk about contributions. So this can be a difficult one to wrap your head around, but I think it's a really good one to start trying to use. And I use it in my life a lot. Because I tend to think I'm right all the time. That's, Really my only flaw, but it's a significant one. So don't talk blame, talk contributions. What does that mean? It means, first of all, abandon this notion that the other person is to blame. Okay, and don't even worry about blame, because when you approach it from that blame perspective, you put someone on the defense. Because now all of a sudden, rather than talking to Frank about what happened, why it happened, and how it can be prevented in the future, instead, you're, like a prosecutor trying to prove that he's guilty. And Frank is on his heels, putting up the best defense he can. Not the best way to collect information that's actually going to be helpful. So when you talk about contributions instead, that's where you open it up and you ask a question like, Frank, let's look at it. How do you think each of us contributed to this situation? Now that is a radical notion. How did you, the boss, contribute to your employee being late? And people bristle at that. They say, well, these are grown adults. It's not my responsibility to make sure they're here on time. No, it's not your responsibility to make sure that they're on time. Or is it? Always be open to the fact that no matter how small your slice of the contribution pie may be, you always have a slice of it. It is never entirely the employee's contribution pie. And I'm riffing on the notion of blame pie, which my favorite podcaster, Kirk Minahan, talks about sometimes when things go wrong with his employees. They do the blame pie. All right, I'll take 25% of the blame pie and you guys get 75%. But in this case, it's contribution pie. You're always going to have a slice of that pie. So just get used to it, num, 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 eat it up, and then talk to the employee about what their slice of the pie is. Because the employee might surprise you and say, all right, here's how I contributed to it. In this case, maybe Frank is going to tell you, well, I get, maybe you don't remember, Grace, but you assigned me to a client based out of Australia. So the night before our monthly meeting, I'm actually up until 3 a.m. running a workshop online with that client. And I'm sorry, I will admit it. I guess I haven't been doing enough to make sure that despite only getting 3 hours of sleep, I'm here on time. If that was his answer, Grace might feel a little bit differently. And Grace needs to be open to, oh yeah, okay. So the assignment I gave him with this overseas client is contributing to this situation. Contribution, it's like excuse versus blame. Does that excuse Frank that reason? No, it doesn't excuse him, but it explains it. It helps explain it. Just so that means you're not blaming him, but it contributes. It's contributing to the situation. Frank might say, yeah, I'm often late because one of our core values here is the client comes first. And that means when your phone rings, if it's a client calling, no matter what, you pick up the phone and you help that client. Well, we meet at 9. I can't tell you how many times my phone rings at 8:48, 8:55, or 8:58. And I pick it up and I talk to that customer because I thought that's what our core value is. And I thought I was upholding that. And I thought maybe you would assume that, give me the benefit of the doubt when I'm late for the meeting, that it must have been because I was doing something good, not because I was slacking off. Again, if an explanation like that might make Grace think twice. And Grace might say, all right, I can see how our organization contributed to this situation because your interpretation of the core value and your attempt to live that core value is contributing to you being late. See, it's all about contribution and really figuring out what exactly happened here. And you're getting away from blame so that Frank is going to be more willing to say, hey, here's what I see as the contributing factors. All right, the next mistake we make, or the next improvement you can make, the different way you can approach it, forget reality and explore perceptions. So this is just like with truth, where there's no reality, there's just interpretations of it. So explore those with people. A great analogy they use in the book is you could go to a parade with your 4-year-old nephew, and afterwards, your sister, your nephew's mother, could say, how was the parade? And both you and your nephew go, oh, it was awesome. Best parade I've ever been to. Okay? You both experience the same parade. If your sister digs a little deeper and says to you, what'd you like about it? And you say, well, they were throwing, they were throwing full-size candy bars out into the crowd, and they were throwing paydays, which are my favorite. I liked that part of the parade. Your little nephew might say, oh, I liked all the fire trucks in it, right? So both of you experience the same parade. had the same opinion on it. It was awesome, totally the best parade ever. But then when you get into the meat and potatoes of it, why'd you feel that way? Well, yeah, you experienced the same parade, but you didn't experience it the same way because you have different perspectives on what makes a parade awesome. So in this case, if Grace is talking to Frank, she might say, Frank, when you roll in late, here's how I experience it. It seems to me, I feel like you come in kind of laissez-faire, as if it's okay that you're late. How do you experience it? How do you feel when you're walking in? And maybe Frank will say, well, yeah, I try to walk in like it's no big deal because I don't want to disrupt the meeting. And I figure if I burst through the door like Kramer, that's going to be even more disruptive. And I know I'm already disrupting it. So I come in cool, calm, and collected because I'm trying not to be disruptive. All right. Again, two different perspectives on it. So she shares her perspective, which is fair, but she's open to saying, Frank, tell me how you experience it, because I know it's going to be different than how I experience it. And then lastly, explore solutions together. So yeah, it's one thing if Grace in her original approach, the reprimand approach, if she says, don't be late anymore, and that's it, just don't be late anymore. Okay, great. This comes down to the notion of you're going to get perhaps compliance, but not commitment. So Frank maybe will start showing up on time. But let's say he was late because he's answering the phone to help customers. Well, now if he starts ignoring them, maybe you're going to start getting some customer complaints. And Frank's technically doing what you told him to do, but now you've got customers saying, hey, Frank doesn't pick up when I call him in the mornings. What gives? It used to be one ring. Frank would pick up and help me out. Now you got unhappy customers. So again, you need to explore the solutions together. If your goal, if the result you want is that Frank never misses another meeting, you're going to get that result with the best positive repercussions that'll ripple out from it if you explore solutions together, where Frank can say and you can work on, all right, Frank, we need to get you some phone coverage. Let's say starting at 8:30 on the mornings of the monthly meetings, we're going to have Andy over there answer your customer calls for you. That way the customer gets helped. We're living our core value, but you're free and you can make sure you're at the meeting at 9. Again, just working on it together. Make it a two-way street. And this kind of assumes that Frank is a competent, smart employee, right? Okay, which hopefully that's who you're dealing with. We'll do an episode on how you should deal with it when you're dealing with people that aren't so smart or competent. But when you have smart, competent people who make a mistake, the reprimand, the punishment is rarely going to get you the good long-term result, because you're robbing yourself of input from that smart, competent person about how to solve the situation and resolve the issues that contributed to the problem in the first place. So explore the solutions together, make it a two-way street, make it a conversation. So here's your action steps, all right, after this marathon episode of Better Workdays. Next time you have to have a difficult conversation, next time an employee screws up and you got to talk to them about it. Number one, think about the result that you want. What is the long-term result that you want? And make sure you keep that in mind when you go into the conversation. 2, shift from that delivering a message, I'm going to send a message here, I'm going to reprimand them kind of thinking. Shift it to, I'm going to go have a conversation with this employee about it. And then lastly, approach it from a place of curiosity and support. Remind the employee that you're there to help them succeed and you need to have this conversation. So again, ask them to help you understand what happened and help you come up with ways to make sure that it doesn't happen again. All right? And go back and re-listen to this episode for more tips on how to put these into action. But here's your simple action steps. Think about the result, have a conversation instead of delivering a message, and approach it from a place of curiosity and support. If you can do that, you will find your difficult conversations aren't so difficult and get you better results. All right, that's it for Better Workdays this week. We will be back next Wednesday at 1 p.m. as always. Check us out on Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok. How cool is that? I'm on TikTok with the kids. A quick aside on TikTok. I'm going to do an episode on this in the future. TikTok's kind of depressing when it comes to work. Lots of videos. Some of them are funny. I certainly like joking about, the things that drive us crazy at work. But some of them just make me feel bad. It seems like there's a whole generation of people out there that really hate their jobs, hate their bosses, and some of it I think is unfair. So I want to do an episode on that. But if you're an older person like me, I'm 38. I'll be 40 next year. I feel like TikTok's not for me. I feel like it's for people in their 20s, you know? So it's very interesting to go from LinkedIn, where everybody is pro leadership, rah, 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 and then go to TikTok, where it's kind of like F the bosses. That's sort of the attitude I'm getting fed a lot of on TikTok. So it's interesting to compare the two. I'd like to create some content that lands somewhere in the middle, because I think most people probably fall somewhere in the middle. Not quite the rah, rah, rah cheerleaders that you see on LinkedIn, and not quite the doomsday complainers, funny that they may be, but complainers that you see on TikTok. So we'll keep an eye out for us on TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can get the podcast on YouTube. If you're listening to us on a podcast app, check us out on YouTube. You can get the stream, get the slides, get the whole deal. You get to see my face. So maybe not. I do have quite a few moles. Maybe just stick to the podcast app if you want to. All right. I'm rambling. Apparently, that's how I'm going to end each episode from now on, with just some rambling until I get really uncomfortable. And I think, oh God, should I just restart the whole episode and re-record it, because this is getting embarrassing. Bye-bye. See you next week.